Hello indie gaming fans, I'm the Hardcore Gamer, and today we're going to be taking another trip down memory lane as I talk about PowerSlave Exhumed. PowerSlave Exhumed is the latest from Nightdive Studios and bringing a classic game back for modern hardware, but there are going to be some differences that you find in this one that may be a bit surprising. Back in 1993, there were some Nintendo of America employees that left with the idea of starting their own company to make new games. That company would become known as Lobotomy Software, and the first full game that they started working on was a first-person shooter with an Egyptian theme. The game was originally known as Ruins, but they later changed it to the name PowerSlave, and yes, that is an Iron Maiden reference, and they were developing it using the build engine made famous by Duke Nukem 3D. After Lobotomy Software found out that they were having too much trouble porting over the build engine to consoles, they decided to make their own. What came of this was actually an even better engine that would allow for fully 3D worlds, so all the way back in 1996, we actually had a first-person shooter on console that was better than it was on PC. So the reason for this little history lesson is so that you can understand why Nightdive Studios decided that instead of doing another PC port, they were actually making a best of both worlds between the PlayStation and Saturn ports. The story of PowerSlave is set in the late 20th century where you go into the ancient Egyptian city of Karnak, which has been seized by some aliens. Your helicopter has been shot down and you are the only person to survive, so it's up to you to fight through, destroy them all, and save the world. This was the mid-90s after all, and it's not like games really had a whole lot of story, especially first-person shooters. What more of a reason do you need to go around and kill some aliens? With that said though, they did try a little bit and have some points of narration as well as little cutscenes that are narrated by iconic film trailer announcer Don LaFontaine. Once you hear the voice, you'll know it if you grew up around that time. One thing that set this game apart from other first-person shooters of the time, including its own PC port, is the fact that it had a Metroid-like progression system where sometimes you would find power-ups that would allow you to go back to previous levels and go to sections you couldn't reach before. So while a lot of the gameplay was very much like Doom in that you were exploring levels and finding keys to unlock doors, you also would have to find these different abilities, and there were multiple exits to each level. All of these levels are connected by an overworld map, and you can play them in any order once you've unlocked them. There's also the choice of being able to use the old style overworld map or a newly created one, and you can change them on the fly. While this does lead to a bit of backtracking and feeling like you might be getting a little bit lost or repeating some levels, it did make things stand out quite a bit from other games which were very linear at the time, and even today still keeps it feeling very fresh. Anytime I found myself getting a new upgrade or ability, it got me thinking about other parts that I wasn't able to pass before, so I would go back to those levels and try to do some exploring. There is thankfully an auto map feature, so while you're going back to those levels, you will not get as lost as you could, but it does reset every time you go to a level, so you'll have to keep redrawing it. Sometimes though, you can find a map within the level which will draw out every place you can go, but will differentiate with different colors if it's a place you haven't visited yet that run. When this game was originally released on the Saturn, it had a bit of an auto-aim feature, so if an enemy was above or below you, it would automatically shoot them. The PlayStation version, on the other hand, had to make you do a manual aim a little bit, and it was very clunky with the controller, especially since the DualShock wasn't even out yet at the time. Thankfully, for this latest release, they've made it so you can do modern controls using either a keyboard and mouse or a controller. These controls work nice and smooth just as you would expect them to do, and thankfully there's not a whole lot that you have to worry about as well. It's mostly aim, shoot, jump, or change your weapons. The next part that really surprised me playing in 2022 is that there are some first-person platform segments, and they actually work really well. All the platforms that you need to land on are nice and big. They're not narrow, which makes it hard. So by having them easier to do, it makes it way more fun. PowerSlave Exhumed has been completely rebuilt using the KEX Engine, which some people may recognize as the engine used for the unofficial remake PowerSlave EX. This engine allows it to still remain and feel like the original game, but also have some modern upgrades like widescreen resolutions and higher frame rates. The remake still retains all the original artwork, so it is still a 3D world using 2D sprites for the objects in it. Thankfully though, with the updated engine, you can use things like anti-aliasing so they look less jaggy in the higher resolutions. So yes, it does look like an older game. It is not a full-on remake, they just made it so that it had some modern conveniences and would run on modern hardware. There were all kinds of different options that you can use to mess around with how the game would look, but I didn't want to even do that because I liked the way that it looked, and maybe there will be some options that will make it look better to you. I had it running at the 2K resolution at 165 frames per second because that's what my monitor is, but I'm sure it would have no problems running at 4K as it really is just a bunch of sprites. I mentioned before about the high quality narration, and the same can be said about the music as well. When the game originally was released on PC, it was one of the few games that actually used Red Book audio, which means that it was full digital sound instead of using MIDI music. This was obviously the same thing that they used on the Saturn and PlayStation as well, and that digital audio has carried over to this latest port. It's not a soundtrack I would want to listen to on its own, but it definitely fits the theme well of the game. If I were to say that you were playing a video game in the 90s that had an Egyptian theme, you would know what this soundtrack sounds like. It pretty much does just that and is very stereotypical, but it fits and adds to the fun. PowerSlave is definitely a game that was underrated at the time that it came out and has built up a following since. This latest port will be a great way for people to rediscover a classic that they either played back in the day and forgot about, or maybe never played at all because they passed on it. This is the perfect way to play a game where you get to run, shoot, and even solve some puzzles and platform. While the original inferior PC version is available on GOG, I would definitely recommend spending your money instead on getting this upgraded version.
Your fearless displays as a warrior provide hope for this dying land, and your quest for peace will bring you just rewards. A deep cavity has been excavated in the south, where there's rumor of a fierce weapon that engulfs its victims in a breath of fire. Go there now and harness its power.
Speaking of upgrades, boy do we have a bunch more indie warriors right now, and I would love to take the time to thank them. Bill T, Christian Cruz, Kevilo, Mitchell Hall, Chris Jackson, Nathan Moore, Adriana Amato, CJR, C Coyle, Skeptism, Haley, Julian Colbus, Jen Rose, Jesse, CPM, Bunny, JRS the 8th, Ray Lynn, Marky Mint, Dave Hart, Peekaboo, Lex Noyle, Eric, PSC, King of the Hatch, Carmine Red, and Larkison. I really want to thank you for all of your support for us here at I Dream of Indie. We greatly appreciate it. If anybody else would like to join them, all the information is in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, enjoy gaming.